first of all, I want to say thanks to Mayor Naish and to Angela McLean, the town CIO, for agreeing to do this with us. It's kind of a bit of a stretch for everybody to kind of get out and do this, and so it's great that you're so cooperative with the Chamber to help us do this. What we'd like to do is Doug's going to give us a presentation, so his vision of where the town is now and where it's going. We all know that the town has tremendous history, tremendous opportunities, but a lot of challenges and constraints as well too, and I think Doug's going to touch on a lot of those. He's going to give a presentation. I'm going to open the floor to a Q&A as well, and I'm sure the level of questions can come from all sorts of different angles and perspectives and comments. But what I would ask you, though, because this is, it's breakfast, it's the first session of the day, be respectful in your questions, be kind, don't give yourself indigestion or anybody else indigestion in the process. But we'll kind of take it from there and go from there. And so hopefully we'll have a good presentation from Doug and a good discussion. And we'll get a better sense of really what's happening in the town. And from the Chamber's perspective, we really want to hear back from you folks, from other people as well too, about where you think the business community in this town should be going to, and what the Chamber can help that take place. So Mayor Naish, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Really appreciate the invitation to come here. It certainly was quite a bit of work, and Angela's looking over at me because she got to do most of it, as you might imagine. I'm quite a good delegator, as it turns out. So anyway, so Angela and I did work on this together, and others at Town Hall, our staff. I want to thank my council for persevering, because there are times that I'm a little out ahead of the pack and they have to be reining me back in again. So I don't think anybody who knows me could imagine that in this room, but that does happen sometimes. In any event, I do think that this is an important thing, as Jamie has outlined. I'm pleased to be able to do it. One thing I wanted to say before I got going is that I had a little practice before I came here today. Last week, I was invited to another event where I was asked to speak about municipal government, and I got rave reviews there. Literally, I'm not trying to be immodest, but at the end of it, they all stood up and cheered and said, "Mayor Naish, you're awesome." And then I got hugs from the whole grade 3 class. So I don't want to put any pressure on you guys, but they were a really good audience. Anyway, before I start, I just want to acknowledge our newly elected member of the legislature, Greg Thompson, who's here today. Thanks, Greg, for being here. And it's very nice to see so many people that I already know, and I think I probably know almost everybody in this room by now. So anyway, we're going to get started. Angela is going to play along. The first part of this, we're going to go fairly quickly. I'm going to have some interjections and comments here, more than what's in the slides. What we've got up in front of you is just a little bit of a reminder for some of us that work in local government of what we're supposed to be doing. And every once in a while it pays to check in. And you'll see in number D, to foster economic, social, and environmental well-being, which seems to answer the question, should town council be involved in economic development? I think it should. There is some debate about that. There is not currently a complete consensus on council about the importance of being involved in economic development, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later as well. Once we take the provisions of the Local Governance Act, we turn those into bylaws for various reasons. Much of our bylaws should be and are related to health and safety. I think one of the things that we constantly have to be vigilant with is, do we have too many bylaws? And is there a tendency to overreact and put in place something that really doesn't fit the test of being required in the long term for reasons of health and safety or some other legitimate reason that's going to last beyond the crisis that we built a bylaw for. And we're still struggling from the past with bylaws that are in place, and some of those bylaws you wonder, how did that ever get put in place? Because it doesn't seem to be real today, and we need to continuously go through kind of an audit process to take a look at what we are actually trying to do. Planning and development has become a very important part of what council does, and it relates directly to economic development and growth, community growth. And these are things that are primarily the responsibility of town council. Development and use of land, conservation, improvement of environment, pollution control, provision of municipal services. This tends to be where most municipal councils get stuck. And because of the overwhelming responsibility of putting things in place, hard things in place, like water, wastewater, fire, police, etc., you sometimes don't get around to the softer parts of the job, but that are equally important, to deal with culture, to deal with heritage, to deal with planning, to deal with economic development. So we are having to look at this in a broader base, and that's why we are currently undergoing a review of our municipal plan bylaw, which is the overriding law of the land, if you like, in our community. Just a little bit of statistics, and I'll tell you why we're putting this up here in a minute. That just gives us what the provincial average was. I believe that was last year's provincial average. We don't have a new one yet for this year. But 1.535, and as you can see, our mill rate, despite the fact that we have had some increases over the past few years, we still have the lowest mill rate in the region and 21% lower than the provincial average. Now, there's a reason for us telling you that. And taking a look at the tax bases, I don't know if anybody's going to be surprised at this, but St. Stephen's total tax base currently is $339 million. St. Andrews is now up to $301 million, even though by population we're only about permanent population, we're only about 40% of the population of St. Stephen. What's interesting, and I want to explain this, the other column is core funding and equalization payments from the provincial government to the municipalities. And as you can see, our payment is $59,000 as a one lump sum payment, and some of the other places seem to be doing much better, but in fact I would argue that we're the ones that are doing better because we've become, through our own industry, almost self-sufficient in terms of being a municipal government. In other words, the equalization program was put in place many years ago to level the playing field for those communities that lost their mill, had reversals of economy. So I think we have to make the judgment that not that we're being picked on or neglected, but that we are actually leading the pack in our region in terms of the economy that we've built here in our town. Property taxes, as you well know and can imagine if you didn't know, make up the vast majority of the revenue that a town gets. The growth in the St. Andrews tax base from one year to the next to this year was $6.95 million, which is not insignificant in terms of the total value of new construction or renovation or the natural increase in prices when properties change hands. And I think, if I remember from Angela's report to council this month, that we had up until now, this calendar year, we had 47 properties change hands within the town of St. Andrews over that period of time. So that's another indication of economic strength and growth. Just to take a look at what our current budget looks like, General operating, which is the day-to-day stuff throughout the town, $3.94 million, $1.81 million general capital, utility operating $650,000, and utility capital $311,000. And the revenue sources gives you an idea of how much money we are generating. This year it's $3.645 million from property taxes, and then another $1.564 million from user fees, and mostly that comes from utility billings. Also, I guess I should have mentioned that we also got $1.049 million from the other two levels of government for their share of various projects that were approved in town. This is just a bit of a snapshot of the things that we've accomplished in terms of our capital program already this year. It's quite a significant list, and if anyone has been driving around and seeing all the nice new asphalt that's been laid down in various parts of the town, that's all on that list. And one of the things that won't get done this year because of the lateness of the time, but has already been approved, is a federal, provincial, municipal partnership to rehabilitate and repave the Bar Road. That will take place in early spring next year, and we're very fortunate to be approved under a program called the Rural and Northern Communities Program, where the municipality's share of the almost $500,000 cost is $34,000, was all our down payment to receive close to $500,000 to rehabilitate the road. So I think that's a fantastic outcome. I had the privilege of meeting with the newly appointed federal minister of infrastructure about a month ago with a bunch of other mayors from southern New Brunswick, and he was very, very strong on the notion that small communities, small rural communities, need more help to be able to compete with larger communities to get their share of the infrastructure funds that the federal government is providing, and it worked for us. So I'm here to say that I think they're going in the right direction. This is one of the big challenges that we've had over the last year and a half is to build an asset management database, an asset management program. Terry Acton of our staff has been working tirelessly for a year and a half to do an inventory of all of the municipal assets and what they're worth and what condition that they're in. That gives you just a pie chart of what they're worth. So the wharf's worth $10 million. All of the rest of the buildings that we have, including the one that we're in today, are worth $31 million. And that surprised me a little bit, but it gives you an idea of what the current worth is. So we've got $86 million worth of assets that we have to manage, and this is the way in which it looks like we're going to have to manage them. We're going to have to upgrade to those kinds of numbers, and we're, at the moment, we just had a lengthy meeting last night talking about the projected 2019 capital budget and the $3.6 million that we think we need, and over the next 5 years, in order to upgrade our assets that are depreciating, we need another $14.8 million. Now, clearly, we're not going to get that all from within St. Andrews, and we may not get it all anyway, but at least we now know what we're up against. One of the most important challenges that we're facing in this town is climate change adaptation. The provincial government has designated our town as one of the most vulnerable places in the province in terms of facing the challenges of climate change. And you can see from the LiDAR diagram there, all of the blue spots are the places that are probably going to be underwater if we don't do anything about it in the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years. These are just a bit of an outline of the things that since 2016 this council has been able to put in place with the assistance of our staff. funding for the arena roof, we're now up to what, about $1.3 million being spent on this roof altogether. Yeah, and so we've now secured this building for the future, thanks to, again, our partners at the federal and provincial government. But one of the other things I want to talk about is the agreement with the Regional Service Commission for Planning and Development Services. We were the first municipality in our region to sign on to contract for services with the Regional Service Commission. And since that time, Grand Manan, St. George, and soon to be Harvey and Macadam will also be signing on. And what that allows us to do is we've created capacity building at the regional service. So we now have where we used to have one building inspector in town, now we have access to 3 fully qualified building inspectors at the Regional Service Commission. We've got 2 or 3 or 4 planners. We have just started today, I'm told, the implementer for a regional recreation plan that's all going to be, and all of those professional people are now available to us at a price that's less than what we were paying for planning and building inspection services before. And you might imagine, with the amount of building that we had going on here, that most months 50% of the work at the planning office in St. Stephen is created by St. Andrews. So we're really getting a good deal at this point in time. Here are some of the challenges that we've identified, but by no means are these all of the challenges. Population decline. The population, even though we've had some successes and we have lots of new people that have moved into town that I've met, we've also lost a lot of people from town. The asset management I did talk about a little bit in terms of the challenge of figuring that all out and trying to build a program so that we can rationally improve our assets and maintain them over time. Climate change, I talked about briefly. I think that is one of the most critical things, and right now we're contemplating the first phase for next year of the protection of the Market Wharf and the Market Square downtown, because it's the most critically endangered place because of climate change, and you can already see the damage being done there. Housing. I'm becoming increasingly concerned about the competition for housing within St. Andrews and whether or not we have the right kind of housing and enough housing for people who need it. We have people who are having very grave difficulty finding suitable rental accommodation, and we're now being challenged by more and more, it seems, Airbnb placements and speculators who are buying property, I believe, in order to turn them into Airbnbs without any regulation, and it's something that our council is going to have to face in the next few months. Do we want to regulate? Do we want to have some sort of control over that? And if we can't have housing, we're not going to have employees for businesses in this town. And I think that's a really critical thing we need to deal with. Primary health care. I've spent quite a bit of time over the last year talking to Horizon Health and the Department of Health about the need for primary health care, and we're now moving forward, and I'm very hopeful that in the foreseeable future now we will obtain a second doctor to give relief to Dr. Peer, who's been soldiering away there, doing extra duty for 3+ years now, having gone through 5 co-practitioners in the practice here over the past 12 years. And he's the survivor of all of that. So I think we're going to get where we need to go. One little note is, as part of this discussions that we've had, a second nurse practitioner has just been hired at the Community Wellness Center at the Charlotte County Hospital, and part of her responsibilities are to St. Andrews. So we have the use now of a dedicated person who will be doing work here in St. Andrews, and I think will already be on the mark to be at the community college and the high school with the sexual health clinics, so will be coming down the pipe soon. Transportation, that's one of the things that council approved money for to do a proper transportation study. We've been doing it piecemeal, and we've been making some progress. You'll notice the nice new parking spots that we have out front, but we really do need to do a comprehensive traffic and transportation study for the town that deals with anything and everything, crosswalks, disabled parking spots. We need to have a comprehensive, rational plan. And of course, my personal favorite, I know more about deer than I ever wanted to know in my entire life. I don't know why it was me. I'm not a hunter and I'm not a gardener, but I'm the one that's in the middle of the deer controversy. So we're still awaiting some response from the minister, who is no longer the minister, and we're waiting for the provincial government circumstance to sort itself out in Fredericton. But one good optimistic thing is that the natural resources scientists have been down just recently and done their own audit of how many deer we have in town, and they actually found even more than our study last year found, and that won't surprise any of us who drive around the streets every night. And the other thing I wanted to just touch upon, because I'm certainly no expert, is that we have had increasing concerns about the provincial property tax model that's being used. As you know, here there's been lots of controversy over the years about property tax assessments, which are all done from Fredericton by the provincial government. And we're beginning to wonder here whether or not that's the right way to go, whether or not there should be more local government involvement in property assessment and property tax collection. And so we're just scratching the surface right now, but that's something that I believe that we need to look at very seriously. This is just an interesting bit of information that came out of another session that Angela and I attended. And it's quite dramatic. If you take a look, in 2000, there were 3.3 workers for every retiree. By 2016, it was 2, down from 3.3, and by 2037, it'll be down to 1.3. So obviously the population is aging, and we don't have any replacement young workers that we can rely upon, which has a direct impact on anyone who's an entrepreneur or a business owner trying to find people to do work. Town of St. Andrews, 5.5% decline in population in 5 years. Charlotte County, 4.2. And this is startling to me. In 2003, 162 people under age of 20 per 100 people over 65, and now it's down to 88 people under the age of 20. So that's a 50% decline in the number of young people compared to the number of older people. So and again, I think we all knew this, it's been well publicized, median age of us folks in St. Andrews, 52.8 years. I can certainly attest to that. I'm way over the median. One of the things we need to do, as was pointed out earlier, is that growing the tax base is in fact the best way to progress and to prosper. We need it, what we do need, and we've come across this, we've actually talked about this mostly so far, about recruiting a second physician. And not only recruiting, but retaining the physician, because we've not had a good track record of bringing in physicians and having them stay more than a couple of years before going on to some other place. So we need some sort of a recruitment campaign. I know Angela has been looking at this in some detail to try to figure out how we can do this. And I know, Deputy Mayor Henderson is a marketing guy, and we're counting on him to help us with this as well. We need to put together some sort of a generic recruitment thing that not only will help us recruit one doctor, but will help us to recruit businesses, to help us to recruit people who just want to come and live here, or even to recruit more retirees. I'm not complaining about retirees. I'm simply saying that retirees in the main don't want to work anymore, and therefore we need young people as well, because we have jobs that need to be done. The other thing that I think we're behind the curve on in terms of the rest of our region is embracing immigration. It's not that we have not done that, but we haven't done it to the degree because we haven't had the need. So when you go to St. George and Blacks Harbor and St. Stephen, where they have more industrial placements, industrial jobs, they have really gotten out ahead of the curve, and they've really put a lot of energy into trying to attract people from other countries, from other places, to come here and live and work and raise their families. And I think we need to do a better job into the future, and I'm certainly committed to doing that, because I think that's one part of the resolution of our problem. Now, finally, this is just me talking. This is where I'm out ahead of the rest of council, I think. But 10 years ago, there was an outstanding report done on various models of regional government that could be implemented in New Brunswick. And that's been one of these things that has not had any political traction for 10 years. But here's the situation that we're dealing with in our local area. We already have somewhat of a regional model in place with the fire service. The Finn report back in 2008 had a number of models, but the model that appealed to me, and the one that I think fits our circumstance most, is a model where all local service districts would be abolished in New Brunswick in favor of 54 rural municipalities with elected councils. In our circumstance, and these 54 areas were primarily looked at as being natural catchment areas, where the people already living in that sub-region were gravitating together and for various activities, recreation, business. Anyway, the model, if we put that in place in our peninsula, then we would have one government that would be from the tip of St. Andrews to Highway 1, would take care of everybody's needs in that whole area. And the model would include policing and public works, planning, administration. There would be a duly elected council, transparent fiscal management, and economies of scale and land available for development. And just to give you a comparator, we already talked about this, our assessment base here in St. Andrews is $301 million, but from the outskirts of St. Andrews to Highway 1, there's another $224 million of assessment base there that if combined, my hypothesis is that the people from here to the Highway 1 would all get better services if it was administered locally with that kind of tax base. As it happens now, that 224 million tax base generates tax revenue, 100% of which goes to the provincial government and comes back to the local service districts in terms of services that the provincial government pays for directly. I don't mean to indicate that they don't get anything, they do, but I'm arguing that the logic of having local governments means that they're the first point of contact for citizens, and that you're more likely to get your services satisfactorily dealt with locally than you deal from trying to deal in Fredericton. And I can say that with some authority because I worked in Fredericton as a senior manager in the provincial government for 20 years, and I certainly would not have professed to have understood what went on in Bayside, but as the mayor of St. Andrews, I can figure out what goes on in Bayside. So I think there's just a logic to it, not me personally, but just a logic to it that people would be better represented and services would be more appropriately delivered if we did them more locally, and I think we're up for that. I think we can do it. So anyway, one of the other things we need to do is we need to grow. We have to grow our communities. We have to not just grow our tax base, we have to grow our population. We are very short on permanent residents, and especially younger ones, so we need to do all of that. And I think when I started thinking about, as I mentioned, thinking about economic development, who's responsible for that, the only conclusion that you can come to is that everybody in this room is responsible for economic development in their various capacities. Certainly the town is responsible for proper land use planning, zoning, building bylaws, and perhaps creating financial or in-kind incentives for developers and provision of infrastructure and services so that when people want to come here and set up businesses, for example, that those services are available to them. I believe that the Chamber of Commerce, one of the roles that the Chamber could play if it wished to, would be to advise on where the gaps are in businesses, to sort of say, do we need any more of these, but we don't have any of these, but we would like to have that in our community. So some sort of an analysis that gets done. And also, I think the business recruitment part of it and the searching out and finding developers. One of the things that surprised me when I became mayor is how difficult it is to find developers. We've been very fortunate here because we have some developers sitting in right here in our midst, and they're all people who started out as local people, and they're still local people, but attracting people from outside. There's no lineup of outside developers standing there to create things for us. We have to go and look for that, and we've been very fortunate that we've had some successful developments going on, mostly engineered and initiated by local people who have already a connection to our community. But I don't think that's going to take us everywhere we need to go. So we need to go out there and find people that are willing to come in and invest in us and do what we think needs to be done. Anyway, we're still going back to the regional collaboration. I want to really have a shout out here to all of my colleagues who are mayors and councillors in this region, because we've developed over the last couple of years and more a really effective working relationship. The Regional Service Commission has become a very effective organization, and I certainly enjoy my participation there. And so we've also got, we've been going on, and I know Angela McLean, our CAO, is now regularly meeting with the CAOs of other communities in our region. I regularly meet with the other mayors, and so we have this kind of collaboration going on that I think will lead to some efficiencies and leading us to partnerships that will get us a little further, a little faster than if we were all working on our own problems in isolation. Good. I think that's about it. I don't think I've got much more to say other than leaving you with the thought.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doug, and thank you, Angela. You did an awesome job switching the slides there, Angela, but I'm sure there was a lot more behind the scenes that quite certain there was, so thank you, Angela.
No, babysitting Doug is a tough job, I tell you.
That's right. And Greg, welcome to you as well, too. I think one of the messages that we heard, and I'm sure you've, in your previous political careers, you've heard that everything was always Ottawa's fault. Well, now everything is all Fredericton's fault. So
I didn't exactly say that.
So welcome, and we look forward to your cooperation. So that was great, Doug. Thanks very much for that, and certainly, the information you gave us on how the town is functioning, some of the financial situations, the challenges. And your thoughts on moving the town forward, and particularly in regards to economic development from the Chamber's perspective and population growth. And one thing we've been talking around the Chamber table is not just those concepts of economic development and population growth, but trying to set some goals around that. What do we want to be, and how can we actually articulate that? And you've noted a population decline in a number of years. Where do you think we should be? What's the ideal size of the town of St. Andrews?
Well, I think that that's a tough question. I know, and this is just guesswork on my part at this point, but you always have to have a target, even if it's an unrealistic target. But I think we need 3,000 permanent residents in our region, sub-region. Not necessarily the town as the town exists, because as you know, I've staked out my territory. I'm a regional government guy, and so I've always been that way. But 3,000, and we probably have that between here and Highway 1. We probably already have 3,000 people, quite frankly. But yeah, I would say 3,000 is kind of the minimum. And then the question is, who should those people be? And that sounds very elitist. That's not meant that way. But what kind of skills, what kind of contribution would we want those people to make? You know, do we want them to be entrepreneurs? Do we want them to be business people? Do we want them to, you know, be the owner of the new McDonald's franchise? We have to make those kinds of choices, and we can make those choices. We don't have to just sit back and wait for someone to show up. We can go out and recruit and look for what we actually want to enhance our community. So that's my guess. We do need targets, and right now my number one target is another full-time practicing primary physician in our new health center that's going to stay for 20 years. How's that for whether we get that or not, but that's what we should be shooting for. We should be looking for someone who's coming here as a physician because they want to be here. You know, physicians can have employment and make lots of money anywhere they go because they're in demand everywhere. So you really have to position ourselves to say, why would someone want to come and live amongst us and find the kind of person that would want to do that? And I think those people are out there. We just have to look hard to try to find them.
Questions from the floor? Chris?
Thank you. Doug, you began your presentation by talking about what the job, basically, of the municipal government is. And of course, we should be aware that any municipality's function is controlled by whatever legislation the province puts in place. Of course, that legislation has been recently updated. My question for you is, do you think that municipalities in New Brunswick have the flexibility they need? And if they don't, where do you see the bottlenecks?
Okay, that's a good question, Chris. I think that, first of all, we have to understand the Local Governance Act, which replaced at the beginning of this year a almost 50-year-old Municipalities Act, actually is an act that modernized the Municipalities Act, but did not put in place significant reform. So there's another phase, I believe, that has to happen with the Local Governance Act. And I personally, as much as I'm an expert, and I'm not an expert on the Local Governance Act, but I know pretty much what it says. And what it says, there are some good things in it, but it's not full-on reform of what was there before. And again, I'll just go back to what I said in my presentation. I think the property tax system needs to change, and I think it needs to be focused. And I'm not saying this is good or bad, but if we were sitting over in Calais right now, and you know, I got my bill for my property taxes for my house, I'd be going down to the city hall in Calais, and I'd be going into an office there and paying my money. And after they collected all the money that was owed to them for property taxes in the city of Calais, then they'd get some sort of an invoice from Augusta, and Augusta would say, this is the share of our, you have to send us this much money, and then they'd fight about it, but they'd have the money, not the other way around. Our system works the other way around, and I don't think that's the way it should be, and I think it doesn't have to be that way. I think the one good thing about the Local Governance Act, there's many good things, but one really good thing about it is it absolutely establishes that municipalities are a third level of government in Canada, which is symbolically significant. And I think that, and in fairness, in my tenure as mayor, I've always found that the representatives of the provincial and federal government have treated me in that way as the kind of leader of the municipal government, and that's why I think we've been somewhat more successful in raising funds and partnerships and doing some of the things we've been able to do, because I think there's a change in attitude already at the provincial and federal level about how important municipalities are, because they actually are right at the cutting edge for citizens. And most of the things that Angela hears about in her office, some days they're about the provincial government and the federal government, but people, no matter what their problem is, they come first to the municipal government to see if they can get it fixed, because they're familiar. They know that. They know they'll get some response there. And that's okay. That's good. That's a good thing. And so that's one area. There are others. There are some good things. We gave you some statistical information, but one of the things that came about because of the Local Governance Act is by June of next year, we're going to have to produce a comprehensive annual report of the municipality. That's now a requirement. And that's been a requirement in many other jurisdictions, but I think that's a good thing. I think that forces us to account for what we did, And Angela's shaking her head, but she knows that. But yes, but I think that is a good thing. And then that becomes transparent. It's available to everybody.
Thank you for the question. Any other questions for Doug?
Yes?
So, is there a way that us as a big business community can be more involved with input before some of the decisions are made? Such as changes in zoning or the market square, things like that, that we can be informed in advance and give our input and better communication with the business community in general.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very thorny issue for me. And don't get me wrong. I'm all about consultation. I think that's built into almost every decision of any consequence that a council has to make. The requirement that we do consult, that we do find out. But we've had a lot of difficulty with communication because, and I'll tell you what I think myself personally, and this is just me speaking, I think everybody who's a citizen of this town has to make it their responsibility to try to find out what's going on if they're at all interested. We've done, I'll give you just an example. It's a silly example, but I one night at the Regional Service Commission, when we were preparing to implement the curbside recycling program, I made the point that because 52% of us get most of our information at the post office in St. Andrews, me included, that we ought to do a flyer, and we would pay for it to go into everybody's mailbox, because not everybody in our town is doing this to get their information on an app or whatever, and as many people are, but I said, just so people know what's going on. And you know what happened? About 75% of those flyers went immediately into the recycle bin, which is ironic, but underneath. So you can only do so much, but you're absolutely right. I mean, anytime you have a question, but no bylaws get passed, and no bylaws, no zoning changes are going to get made without, bylaws take 3 readings, which means 3 meetings of council that are open to the public. So, but we will continue to endeavor to find whatever means we can to communicate, and I know that members of council are keen on that. We just put a new old school bulletin board up in front of Town Hall so that it was closer to the road, so that people would see the postings. Every council meeting is the content of every council meeting is posted 5 days before the council meeting downtown. It's on our website. We have Twitter, we have a Facebook page, we have, all of that stuff is there, but it's constantly a battle. But and in some cases, for example, there are hearings of objections to certain things that council's proposing, and those are by law put in the newspaper. So there's a number of ways, but don't get me wrong, I agree with you. We want to communicate with the business community. We can certainly do that perhaps through the chamber. That's another methodology. Maybe make sure the chamber knows when something sensitive to the business community is taking place. But if in doubt, call down to Town Hall and we'll fill you in, because it's certainly transparent. One of the things that we did do last year is we changed our procedural bylaw so that there are now no meetings of councilors that are not public meetings. We do everything in a posted public meeting. Last night we had a 2.5-hour budget meeting that was posted, that was a special meeting of council open to the public. One person came. That's okay. I take that to mean that most people think we're doing a good job, so they don't need to be there and watch, right? But it is open, so you know, we want input. It's not that we don't want input, and.
Is it a formality then that it goes, some announcements go directly to the chamber instead of out?
Sorry, I missed that.
Where it's more of a formality that you post to the chamber reposts to the business.
Yeah, I mean that's
That's a great suggestion.
yeah,
we
that
could
is
do
a good suggestion. Yeah. So,
Good take on so enjoyed the presentation.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate you being here.
Okay, we'll take one more question.
Mayor, one area of vulnerability, or two areas of vulnerability in communities is this one, which I think is a very healthy community, all of it before, are water, long-term water supply. You know, water goes bad one day and your community is down the tubes. And hydro, electricity supply. We are living in an era where, I was reading the other day about a scuba tank cylinder with waste from the Pro can power up a house off the grid for all of its purposes for 20 years before it needs replacement. Are we looking at those two areas of vulnerability, our water, our hydro?
Good question. Our source of water, as you know, is in Shamcook Lake, which is currently outside of the jurisdiction of our town. My little plan solves that problem. Okay, so number one. NB Power, I recently, along with the other mayors in the region, had breakfast with the person who runs Point Pro and several senior people, and we were actually talking about retrofits and things at Point Pro, but not down to what you're talking about in terms of energy. No, it's something that we need to do more about. Again, it's a lack of jurisdiction, but it doesn't mean there's a lack of interest, and I think NB Power is interested in talking to us, and as we organize ourselves as a region and as communities that are all in accord, I think they'll want to talk to us more, and hopefully we can find that. But you're right, if there's any insecurity in hydro, that's a difficult proposition. I do remember one little anecdote when back when I was a councillor and we had the big ice storm over Christmas. Afterwards, NB Power was so impressed with our community, and you know, people running out and bringing their linemen muffins in the morning and stuff like that. You know, it was amazing that the president himself came down for a debriefing with our council, and one of the suggestions that was made to him at that meeting, you know, why don't you get into you rent out water heaters? Why don't you rent out yeah, like we have at the arena here, generators, you know, home generators. Why don't you rent those out? And he thought for a minute, and he said to us, he said, wouldn't that send the message that NB Power is unreliable? And I said, no, it would only send out the message that even NB Power can't control the weather, right? But might be there to help you out, because you might not be able to afford to buy a generator, but you might be able to afford to pay, you know, $14.95 a month on your hydro bill in order to have one installed and replaced if it went bad, like your water heater, eh? So I think they are willing to talk, and I think we need to look at those vulnerabilities. But certainly water, we, notwithstanding the fact that we don't legally control Shamcook Lake, we are involved there continuously in terms of testing and whatnot. So I'm very confident that our water supply, but as you know, that's what they said in a lot of places where it went south and people were killed. You know, people died because of it in places in the world. So we have to constantly be vigilant about our water supply. I would feel more comfortable if it was part of our administration as well. And by the way, that was another one, a part of when I was making my little pitch there about regional government or sub-regional government. One of the things that we don't have in St. Andrews is we don't have an industrial park. But just up the road a few kilometers, in the area that I'm speaking about, there's both an industrial park that's fully serviced and underutilized, and a marine terminal that's currently underutilized. And that's all about planning and economic development. And that could be part of the same umbrella. And the other thing I didn't mention about that is that I think that the current system, and I'm not beating up, and I hope our MLA didn't leave because I was beating up on him. I don't think so. I know him well enough that I don't think he did. But I think people would have more access to serve and to be part of the municipal government. There's limited opportunities for people who live in a local service district to serve. It's not like people who live in a municipality and their opportunity to be representative and be the representative. So someday the mayor of this bigger area could be someone who lives in Bayside and takes care of all the rest of us. That doesn't matter. What we need is 54 rural municipalities. In fact, there's one in our region right now that has gone that route, and that's Grand Manan. They used to have all kinds of small little villages that had their own administrations and whatnot, and now they have a rural municipality with 2,500 people. And it seems to work very well. In fact, my colleague Wayne Sturgeon, who's a councillor there, has just been elected last weekend as the president of the Union of New Brunswick Municipalities. So he's the head of all the municipalities in terms of our association from Grand Manan. So that's another feather in our cap for our region as we move forward.
Okay, we have one more quick question. We're at 9 o'clock, and I know folks want to get to their jobs.
Thank the mayor and council for the work they've done in this time and summer. I hate to look around here because I think I'm the oldest person in the room. I think the time they were just laying the foundation for our end of this arena 55 years ago. And the other thing that really, all these things that I watch, they keep talking about these 60% seniors. I'll tell you one thing, it's better than the alternative.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mayor Naish, for agreeing to do this, and Angela for your support and for providing the facility today. I also want to thank Keena Levesque, our lone staff person at the St. Andrew's Chamber, for doing all the organization work and getting everything together. For CHCO for coming out, you do a great service to our community by providing the news coverage and television coverage for all of our events. And thank you all for coming. This is our first time doing this. I hope we can make this an annual event. Put on your schedules the Wednesday of the starting of Indulge will be the annual State of the Town address time frame. So hopefully we can count on this going forward. Thank you all for coming. Thank you again, Mayor Naish, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.